invisible to her millionaire boss, but when he saw flowers arriving for her, he burned with jealousy. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started. Emily stood by the elevator, her hands nervously clutching the folder in front of her, her mind racing. Today, like every other day, she was just another face in the crowd at the office. No one noticed her, no one cared. She wasn't someone who drew attention or stirred curiosity in the eyes of others. At least not until recently. Nathan Carter, the youngest and most successful CEO in the company, walked past her every day without a second glance. His world was filled with executives, high-profile meetings, and fast-paced decisions. Emily was just a humble assistant, buried under stacks of paperwork, her voice never rising above the hum of the office. She never expected to be anything more than the invisible girl in the background. As she stood waiting for the elevator, she heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up and caught a glimpse of Nathan as he walked by, his usual aloof expression on his face. He didn't even spare her a glance, his eyes fixed on his phone as he passed her by. Emily couldn't help but feel a pang in her chest. She had admired Nathan from afar for so long. His charisma, his sharp business acumen, his undeniable presence. He was the epitome of success, and she was just a small cog in the machine. But today, something was different. The elevator doors opened, and as Emily stepped inside, she noticed something strange. A large bouquet of flowers in the lobby, sitting on the receptionist's desk, and they were for her. The colorful arrangement was beautiful, vibrant, and alive, a stark contrast to the cold, gray atmosphere of the office. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Who would send her flowers? She couldn't think of anyone who would. She looked around the office, unsure whether to take the bouquet or leave it behind. As her fingers brushed the petals, her mind was racing. Was this a joke? Was someone trying to play a trick on her? But then she saw the small card attached to the flowers. It read, "To Emily, from someone who sees you." Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the card for a moment before turning to leave, the bouquet in her hands. Just as she was about to leave the lobby, she noticed Nathan's office door had opened, and he was standing there, watching her. He didn't say a word, but his eyes were fixed on the flowers in her hands, and there was something in his gaze that sent a shiver down her spine. It was a look she had never seen before, intense, almost possessive. She quickly averted her eyes and walked past him, feeling a strange sense of unease. What was happening? Why was Nathan looking at her like that? Little did she know that this simple gesture, these flowers, would set off a chain of events that would change everything for her. Nathan, who had never once acknowledged her existence, was suddenly intrigued. The flowers had stirred something inside him, something he couldn't ignore. And as the days passed, his feelings would grow stronger, more complicated. He couldn't help but wonder, why had she received flowers when he had never even thought to give her a second glance? The jealousy was burning inside him, and he didn't know how to control it. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is the continuation of part 1 in line with your requested format. As Emily walked past Nathan's office, she felt the heat from his gaze still burning into her back. Her steps quickened, her heart pounding in her chest, as the bouquet of flowers in her hands felt heavier with every step. She couldn't understand what had just happened. Why had Nathan been looking at her like that? It wasn't like him to pay attention to anyone, especially not her. She had always been invisible in the grand scheme of things. He was the CEO, the man who could change the fate of anyone he looked at, and she was just a lowly assistant. The flowers felt like a cruel joke, an attention she wasn't prepared for. She took a deep breath and shook her head. It wasn't a big deal, right? It was just flowers. But then again, why was Nathan looking at her so intensely? As she entered her small office, she set the bouquet down on her desk, the soft petals brushing against the glass surface. She sat down and tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to that moment, the look in Nathan's eyes, the way he had watched her, as if she was something he couldn't understand but needed to figure out. Was it jealousy? Or was it something else? The thought haunted her, but she quickly dismissed it. She couldn't afford to get lost in fantasies. She had a job to do. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and phone calls, but Emily couldn't shake the memory of Nathan's gaze. It lingered in her thoughts, nagging at her, even when she was at home, trying to unwind. She hadn't spoken to Nathan since that moment, but the tension was palpable. It was as if something had shifted between them, even if neither of them had said a word. Emily found herself more aware of Nathan's presence in the office. She noticed when he walked by, when he entered meetings, and when he left for lunch. It was almost like she was waiting for him to acknowledge her again, but he never did. It was as if nothing had changed. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had. On the third day since the flowers arrived, Emily was working late at her desk, the only light coming from the soft glow of her computer screen. The office was nearly empty, save for a few employees who were also burning the midnight oil. She was focused on finishing a report when the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. She froze, her eyes darting to the door. She knew those footsteps. They were unmistakable. Nathan was coming toward her office. Panic surged through her. She quickly adjusted her blouse, tidied her desk, and tried to steady her breathing. What was he doing here at this hour? She wasn't sure she was ready to face him again, not after the awkwardness of the last encounter. The door to her office opened, and there he was. Nathan, standing in the doorway, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the floor. He was dressed in his usual sharp suit, his hair neatly styled, his expression unreadable. He looked at her for a moment, and for a brief second, Emily thought he might say something. But instead, he just stepped into the room, his gaze scanning her workspace. "Working late again, Emily?" he asked, his voice low and even. "Yeah, just finishing up a report," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She felt her heart racing, her palms suddenly sweaty. "You've been doing great work. I've noticed," he said, his tone surprisingly warm, though his face remained impassive. Emily blinked in surprise. She had never heard Nathan compliment her before. It was almost as if he was acknowledging her for the first time. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure of how to respond. There was an awkward silence that hung between them. Nathan's eyes flicked to the bouquet of flowers on her desk, and Emily followed his gaze. She felt a strange sense of discomfort wash over her. Was he remembering that moment in the lobby? Did he know it was because of him that the flowers had appeared in the first place? Before she could say anything, Nathan turned and walked toward the door. "Good work, Emily. Keep it up," he said over his shoulder, his voice firm but not unkind. And just like that, he was gone, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts. She couldn't help but wonder what had just happened. She had expected him to ignore her as usual, to brush past her without a second thought. But this was different. And somehow, it made her feel more invisible than ever. Nathan's words, however brief, had stirred something deep within her. A sense of longing, a sense of curiosity, and more than anything, a deep ache she couldn't quite explain. She knew it wasn't just about the flowers anymore. It was about the way he had looked at her, the way his presence affected her. She had always known that Nathan was a powerful man, but now, she was beginning to realize just how much power he had over her. Was she starting to fall for him? Or was it simply the danger of wanting something she could never have? As the night stretched on, Emily couldn't help but think about the strange connection that had begun to form between them. Was it real, or just a figment of her imagination? She wasn't sure. But one thing was for certain. Nathan was no longer the distant, unreachable CO she once thought him to be. And that, more than anything, terrified her. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 3, continuing from part 2, written according to the required format. The days following Nathan's brief visit to her office felt surreal for Emily. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. Nathan, the untouchable CEO who had never once acknowledged her existence, had spoken to her, not just in passing, but with a kind of recognition she had never expected. But at the same time, she felt even more invisible than before. It was as if, despite his words, he was still keeping her at arm's length. That strange tension hung between them, and Emily found herself lost in thought, replaying every moment of their encounter in her head. Why had Nathan suddenly noticed her? Was it just because of the flowers, or was there something more? She had no answers, only questions that seemed to multiply with every passing hour. As the week dragged on, Emily did her best to focus on her work. But every time she caught a glimpse of Nathan in the hallway or saw him in a meeting, her heart would race, and a strange feeling would rise in her chest. Was she imagining things? Or was there a possibility that Nathan was beginning to see her in a different light? On Friday afternoon, Emily found herself once again working late in the quiet office. She was sitting at her desk, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above her and the distant clicking of keyboards filling the room. It was another typical evening, until she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up and saw Nathan walking toward her. Her heart skipped a beat. This time, he wasn't just passing by. He was coming straight toward her. "Emily," Nathan said, his voice low and calm. "Can I have a word?" Emily's throat tightened. She wasn't sure what to expect. Was this the moment he would finally speak to her about the flowers? Was he going to address the strange tension between them? She nodded, trying to keep her composure. "Of course, Nathan," she said, her voice slightly shaky. Nathan stopped in front of her desk and leaned against the edge. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he began, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, she noticed something in his gaze, an intensity that was hard to ignore. "You've been doing a great job lately. I appreciate your work." Emily blinked in surprise. It wasn't like Nathan to give praise so freely. He was always so focused on results that it almost seemed like praise was a foreign language to him. "Thank you," she said quietly, not sure how to respond. There was another pause, and Emily could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on her. Nathan cleared his throat. "There's something about you, Emily," he said slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Something I've noticed." Her heart raced as she tried to process his words. Was he really saying what she thought he was saying? Was this about the flowers? Or was it something else? Before she could gather her thoughts, Nathan continued. "I've been thinking about how you handled yourself in the last few weeks. You've been under a lot of pressure, and you've still managed to get everything done without complaining. You don't ask for attention, and yet you get it. You've caught my eye, and I can't seem to ignore it." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her mind was racing, and she wasn't sure how to react. Nathan had just admitted to noticing her, to actually seeing her for the first time. It was everything she had wanted, yet it terrified her. What did it mean? Was this just a passing observation, or was it something more? "I don't know what it is about you, but I've been thinking about you more than I'd like to admit," Nathan continued, his voice softer now, almost like he was confessing something. "And it's bothering me." Emily's mind was spinning. This was so much more than she had ever expected. Nathan, the CEO she had admired from afar, was actually admitting to being affected by her presence. "I don't know what to do with these feelings," Nathan said, running a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "I've always been focused on business, on success. But now, I don't know." Emily's heart was pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe this was happening. Nathan, the man who had been so distant and unapproachable, was standing in front of her, admitting that he was struggling with his feelings. She didn't know what to say, so she simply stayed quiet, her mind racing. Finally, Nathan took a deep breath and looked at her. "I don't expect anything from you, Emily, but I wanted to be honest. I don't know what happens next, but I can't pretend that nothing has changed." Emily's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She had never imagined this moment, never thought she would hear Nathan speak so openly. She was still trying to process everything he had said. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Nathan nodded, then turned to leave. "I'll let you get back to work," he said, his voice still quiet. As he walked away, Emily sat there, her heart racing. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Nathan had noticed her, really noticed her. And now, everything was different. But what did it mean? What did Nathan expect from her? She didn't know the answers, but one thing was clear. Her life at the office would never be the same again. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 4, continuing from part 3, written according to your required format. The following week was a blur for Emily. Her thoughts were consumed by Nathan's confession, his admission that he had noticed her, that he had been thinking about her. She found it hard to concentrate on anything else. It wasn't just the praise or the acknowledgement that kept her awake at night, but the quiet moments they had shared, the way his gaze lingered on her, as if trying to understand something about her. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, and it unsettled her. What did Nathan want from her? What did this all mean? She didn't have the answers, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. But it wasn't just her own confusion that made her anxious. The office was starting to buzz with talk. The way Nathan had suddenly started showing interest in her was something that didn't go unnoticed. Whispers ran through the hallways, and Emily could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her. She had always been invisible, but now, her every move seemed to be scrutinized. The tension between her and Nathan was palpable, and it wasn't just in the way they spoke to each other, but in the silence that stretched between them. He had changed, but so had she. She found herself watching him more closely, her heart racing whenever he entered the room. She had to remind herself that this wasn't a romance, that this wasn't something that could happen between them. He was her boss, her superior, and she was just an assistant. Yet, despite all the reasons she should distance herself, she couldn't. On Friday afternoon, Emily was once again alone in her office, working late into the evening. The office was quiet, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound breaking the silence. She was focused on her computer screen, her mind fully absorbed in the task at hand, when the sound of footsteps broke through her concentration. She looked up and saw Nathan walking toward her. Her breath caught in her throat. She had not expected to see him this late, and she couldn't help the flutter of nervousness that rose within her. Nathan stopped in front of her desk, his eyes meeting hers. "Emily," he said softly, "we need to talk." Emily's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment she had been dreading and hoping for all at once. "Of course," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Nathan pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. There was a long pause, and Emily could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on them both. She couldn't help but notice how different he seemed tonight. His usual sharp, composed demeanor softened, almost like he was unsure of what to say. "I've been thinking a lot about what I said to you last week," Nathan began, his voice low. "And I need to be honest with you about something else." Emily's mind raced. What could he possibly have to say now? Was he about to pull back from his earlier confession? "I've been struggling with this," Nathan continued. "I've been feeling something I don't normally feel. It's confusing." Emily swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. Was this some sort of confession? Was he telling her that he had feelings for her? "Nathan," she began, her voice shaking. "I don't know what you're trying to say." Nathan took a deep breath and leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense. "I'm saying that I don't know how to deal with this attraction I feel toward you. It's not professional. It's not right. But I can't ignore it anymore. I've been thinking about you all the time, and it's affecting my judgment." Emily sat in stunned silence, her heart racing. This was not what she had expected. Nathan was admitting his feelings, and it was making her feel dizzy, conflicted. "I don't want you to think that this is about anything other than what I'm feeling," Nathan said, his voice tense. "But I can't keep pretending like I don't notice you anymore. You're not invisible to me, Emily. You haven't been for a long time." Emily felt a lump in her throat. This was everything she had ever wanted to hear, and yet, she couldn't bring herself to be happy. "Nathan, she started, but he held up a hand, stopping her. "I know this isn't easy, and I'm not asking for anything from you. But I needed to be honest with you," he said quietly. "I'm not going to act on this. I'm not going to let it affect our work. But I needed you to know how I feel." Emily could barely process his words. She had spent so much time trying to understand what was happening between them, and now, here he was, telling her that he had feelings for her, but he wasn't going to do anything about it. It was the most complicated, confusing thing she had ever experienced. "I don't know what to say," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what this means." Nathan stood up, running a hand through his hair. "It means nothing right now. It means we keep going. We do our jobs, we stay professional, and we don't let this affect anything. But it's there, Emily. It's there between us." Emily felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Nathan had acknowledged what she had felt, what had been building between them, but he was putting a stop to it. She wasn't sure if she should be grateful or frustrated. "I don't want things to change," Nathan said, his voice steady once again. "But I couldn't keep this from you. I had to say something." Emily nodded, still trying to process everything. "Thank you," she said quietly. Nathan gave her a nod before turning to leave. As he walked out of the office, Emily sat there in silence, her mind reeling. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had changed. Nathan had confessed his feelings, but he was choosing to suppress them. Emily was left with more questions than answers. What did this mean for her? What did it mean for their work relationship? She didn't know, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer invisible to Nathan, and that was a truth she couldn't ignore. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 5, continuing from part 4, written according to your required format. The days after Nathan's confession were more difficult for Emily than she had expected. On the surface, nothing had changed. They continued to work together, communicating as if the conversation in her office had never happened. But beneath the surface, everything felt different. Emily couldn't stop thinking about what Nathan had said to her, how he had admitted to his feelings, yet decided not to act on them. She was both relieved and frustrated, torn between wanting to explore whatever connection they had and being terrified of the consequences. The office, once a place of routine, now felt charged with an energy she couldn't escape. Every time Nathan walked into the room, her heart would race, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation in the air. But there was also an uncomfortable tension between them, a silent agreement that they would ignore the elephant in the room and continue on as if nothing had changed. It was a delicate balance, and Emily wasn't sure how long it could last. She found herself stealing glances at Nathan whenever he passed by, wondering if he was still thinking about her. But he never seemed to acknowledge her anymore, not in the way he had during that conversation. He was back to his usual reserved self, focused on his work, and Emily was left to wonder if the whole thing had been a mistake. Did he regret what he had said? Had he changed his mind? As the days passed, Emily did her best to focus on her tasks. She buried herself in her work, hoping it would distract her from the swirling emotions inside her. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. And then, one Friday afternoon, everything changed. Emily was finishing up a report in her office when she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up and saw Nathan standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was he finally going to address the tension between them? Emily, Nathan said, his voice steady. Can I talk to you for a minute? Her stomach flipped. Of course, she replied, trying to sound calm, even though her pulse was racing. Nathan stepped into her office and closed the door behind him. He stood there for a moment, his hands resting on the back of the chair across from her desk. I've been thinking about what we talked about the other day, he began, his tone serious. Emily felt her stomach tighten. This was it. He was going to make a decision, one way or another. I want to apologize, Nathan continued, his voice low. I shouldn't have put you in that position. I shouldn't have made you feel uncomfortable. Emily blinked, surprised. This was not what she had expected. Nathan, she started, but he held up his hand, stopping her. No, listen, he said, his eyes meeting hers. I've been thinking a lot about what I said, and I realize now that I've been unfair to you. I've made things more complicated than they need to be. I shouldn't have let my feelings get in the way of our work relationship. Emily felt a wave of confusion wash over her. Was he retracting everything he had said? Did this mean he no longer had feelings for her? I've been acting like a fool, Nathan admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. I don't want to mess up everything between us. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I don't want to cross any boundaries. Emily felt her heart ache. She had never expected Nathan to backtrack, to apologize for something that she didn't think needed an apology. I didn't want to make things complicated either, she said softly. But I think we've both been avoiding the real issue here. Nathan raised an eyebrow, looking at her curiously. What do you mean? He asked. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. I don't think we can keep pretending like nothing happened. There's something between us, Nathan. We both know it. But we need to decide what to do with it. Nathan's expression softened, and he took a step closer to her desk. I don't know what to do either, he said, his voice quiet. But I don't want to lose you as a colleague. I don't want to make things awkward, but I also can't ignore what I'm feeling. Emily looked down at her hands, suddenly feeling the weight of the situation. She had always known that Nathan was a complicated man, but this was more than she had bargained for. We don't have to have all the answers right now, she said finally, lifting her head to meet his gaze. But we do need to be honest with ourselves and with each other. Nathan nodded slowly. I agree, and I'm sorry if I've made things harder for you. Emily smiled faintly. You didn't make things harder. We just need to figure out where we go from here. There was another long pause, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Nathan spoke again, his voice soft but firm. I don't want to lose what we have, Emily. Whether it's just as colleagues or something more, I want to make sure we handle this the right way." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Was he saying he still wanted something more? Or was he simply trying to maintain the professional distance between them? She wasn't sure, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice steady. "One step at a time." Nathan gave a small, relieved smile. "One step at a time," he repeated. And with that, Emily knew that whatever happened next, things between them had changed forever. They weren't just colleagues anymore, and they weren't just two people with complicated feelings. They were two people trying to navigate something uncertain, something powerful. And that was a step in the right direction. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 6, continuing from part 5, written according to your required format. The days that followed their conversation felt like a strange kind of limbo for Emily. Nathan's words echoed in her mind constantly, but things between them were still unspoken, and every interaction now felt laced with an undercurrent of tension. She tried to keep a professional distance, as they had both agreed to do, but it wasn't easy. The reality of what had been said hung in the air, and despite the restraint they both tried to maintain, it seemed impossible to ignore. At work, Emily's focus started to slip. She was distracted by the memory of Nathan's admission, how he had confessed his feelings, but also declared that nothing could change. The push and pull between them was maddening, and she couldn't help but wonder if she was imagining things. She caught herself glancing at him more often than not, and she could feel his gaze on her every time they crossed paths. But neither of them had crossed the line yet. Every morning, Emily arrived at the office early, hoping to get through the day without any more complications. She would go through her tasks with determination, but her mind wandered back to Nathan. What did he mean when he said he didn't want to lose her? Was he talking about their work relationship? Or was there something deeper, something that both of them were too afraid to acknowledge? The questions swirled around her, but she kept them to herself. She couldn't risk making things more complicated. And yet, it was Nathan who made the first move. On a Thursday morning, Emily was sitting at her desk, working on an urgent report, when she felt a presence standing beside her. She looked up to find Nathan standing there, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. She felt her heart skip a beat. Was this it? Was he about to finally address everything? "Emily," Nathan said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" She nodded, unsure of what to say. Her pulse quickened as she stood up and followed him down the hallway to a quieter part of the office. Nathan led her into a small conference room and closed the door behind them. The silence was thick, heavy, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Emily waited, her nerves on edge. Finally, Nathan broke the silence. "I've been thinking," he started, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of tension, "about what we talked about before." Emily felt her stomach flip. "I've been thinking too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan met her gaze, and for the first time in a long while, Emily saw a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. "I don't know how to move forward, Emily," Nathan admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can't keep pretending that what I feel doesn't matter. I can't keep pushing it down, pretending it's not there." Emily felt her heart beat faster. Was this the moment he was going to make a decision? Was he finally going to act on his feelings? "I don't want to make things difficult for you," Nathan continued, his voice lower now. "But I can't ignore this anymore. I don't want to regret not being honest." Emily's mind raced. She had hoped for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt a mixture of excitement and fear. What did this mean for them? What did it mean for their careers? "Nathan," she began, her voice shaky, "I don't want to make things difficult either. But we have to be realistic about this." Nathan nodded, his expression softening. "I know," he said quietly. "I don't expect anything from you. But I needed to tell you how I feel. I needed you to know that I'm not just going to pretend like this doesn't matter." Emily could see the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time, she felt a sense of relief. Nathan wasn't asking for anything he didn't think she could give. He was just being honest, something that had been missing between them for so long. "So what do we do now?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. Nathan took a deep breath and smiled softly. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice low. "But maybe it's okay not to know right now. Maybe we can figure it out together." Slowly, without rushing. Emily couldn't help but smile in return. The weight that had been hanging over them both for so long seemed to lift in that moment. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it felt like the first step toward something real. "I think we can do that," Emily said, her voice steady for the first time in days. Nathan's smile grew a little wider, and for a brief moment, everything felt right. They weren't rushing into anything. They were taking it one step at a time, acknowledging their feelings without the pressure of figuring it all out at once. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and for Emily, that was enough. "One step at a time," Nathan echoed, his voice warm and sincere. They both stood there for a moment, looking at each other, the tension that had been building between them dissipating. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the end of their story, not by a long shot, but it was a new beginning, and that was something she could work with. Nathan gave her a final look, as if to say that everything would be okay, before turning and walking back toward his office. Emily stood there for a moment longer, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Whatever came next, they would face it together, one step at a time. "I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 7, continuing from part 6, written according to your required format." As the weeks went by, things between Emily and Nathan settled into a strange, unspoken rhythm. They worked side by side, the tension still lingering in the background, but somehow easier to bear. Their conversations were professional, their interactions marked by a mutual respect that hadn't existed before. Emily found herself growing more comfortable around him, though she couldn't help but notice the occasional glance, the moments where their eyes would meet and linger just a little too long. It wasn't anything overt, but it was enough to stir the butterflies in her stomach. Nathan, for his part, seemed to be keeping his distance as well. He didn't make any further advances, no bold declarations, no attempts to break the delicate balance they had agreed upon. It was as if he was waiting, letting time and circumstance dictate the next step, whatever it might be. Emily appreciated that. It made her feel like she could breathe again, like they were moving forward without the weight of expectation. She had so many questions, so many uncertainties about what this relationship, whatever it was, would become. But for now, she was content to take things one day at a time. Still, despite the calm on the surface, things were not as simple as they seemed. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan was still watching her, studying her, as if trying to figure out how to make sense of his own feelings. He was careful with his words, his actions, but there was an intensity in his gaze that didn't go unnoticed. It wasn't until one afternoon, when the office was quieter than usual, that Emily realized just how much Nathan's attention had changed the dynamic between them. She was working late again, her desk scattered with reports and files, when she heard a knock at her office door. She looked up to see Nathan standing there, his posture more relaxed than usual, though his eyes were still as intense as ever. "Emily," he said, his voice gentle. "Can we talk?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. They hadn't had a personal conversation in days. It wasn't that they were avoiding each other, but both of them had been careful not to push boundaries. This felt different, though. Nathan's voice held a certain weight to it, as if he had something important to say. "Of course," she replied, trying to keep her tone casual, even though she could feel the tension building in her chest. Nathan entered her office and shut the door behind him. He walked over to her desk and stood there for a moment, looking down at the reports she had been working on. "I've been thinking," Nathan began, his voice lower than usual. "About everything. About us." Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. This wasn't a conversation she had been expecting. She hadn't thought that Nathan would bring up their situation again so soon. "Nathan, we agreed to keep things professional," Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We said we would take things slow." Nathan nodded, but there was something different in his expression. "I know," he said quietly, "but I can't keep pretending that I don't feel something more. I don't want to make things harder for you, but I can't ignore this." Emily's heart raced. It was happening again. Nathan was admitting to something he had been holding back. "What do you mean?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan walked over to her desk and leaned against it, his eyes fixed on hers. "I've been holding back for weeks, trying to convince myself that it was just a passing attraction, that I could ignore it. But I can't anymore. I care about you, Emily. More than I should, more than I expected." Emily's breath caught in her throat. His words hit her like a wave, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. This was not what she had been expecting. This was not the calm, controlled Nathan she had been working with. This was a man who was opening up, exposing his feelings in a way that left her no choice but to confront her own. I've been trying to keep things professional, Nathan continued, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. I know I'm your boss, and that complicates things. But I can't pretend that I don't feel this connection between us. It's been building ever since we first spoke, and I can't ignore it any longer. Emily's mind was a whirlwind. She had felt this too, but hearing Nathan admit it out loud made it feel real, undeniable. She had always tried to keep her distance, not just because of their professional roles, but because she wasn't sure if this was something she could allow herself to explore. But hearing him speak so openly, so honestly, made her question everything. I care about you too, Emily said before she could stop herself. The words slipped out, and for a brief moment, she regretted saying them. But then she saw Nathan's face soften, and she realized that it was the truth. She did care about him, more than she had ever expected. Nathan reached out, gently placing a hand on her desk. I don't want to complicate things, he said, his voice quiet. I don't want to put you in a difficult position, but I can't keep pretending that nothing is happening between us. I'm not asking for anything right now, but I want you to know how I feel. Emily nodded slowly, her heart pounding. I don't know what to do with this, she admitted, her voice shaky. I don't know where we go from here. Nathan took a deep breath, his gaze steady. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice firm. One step at a time. Together. Emily looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions. They weren't rushing into anything, but they were finally acknowledging what had been between them all along. It was the first time she felt like they were truly on the same page. She took a deep breath and smiled faintly. One step at a time, she echoed. And with that, they both knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, no longer hiding from what they both felt. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 8, continuing from part 7, written according to your required format. After their conversation, everything between Emily and Nathan seemed to settle into a new, unspoken understanding. They had agreed to take things slow, one step at a time, but the tension between them lingered. It wasn't the kind of tension that made things uncomfortable. Rather, it was the kind of tension that made the air feel electric, charged with possibilities. Their interactions at work became more casual, but the moments of quiet understanding between them were undeniable. Emily found herself glancing at Nathan more often, noticing the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. There were small, meaningful gestures, like the way he would open the door for her, or how he always made sure to ask about her day, things he had never done before. Emily had started to feel more seen, more recognized. The butterflies she had felt before were now replaced with a warm sense of something deeper, something real. Nathan, on the other hand, seemed to be walking a fine line between maintaining his professionalism and wanting to act on his feelings for Emily. He hadn't made any further advances, but there were moments when she could see the internal struggle in his eyes. He was trying, just as she was, to keep everything at a steady pace. But the unspoken words between them were starting to get harder to ignore. Emily couldn't help but feel a growing sense of anticipation each time Nathan entered the room. The space between them seemed to shrink with every passing day, and it was only a matter of time before they would have to face the inevitable. It wasn't until one Friday evening that everything came to a head. The office was nearly empty, the dim lights casting long shadows across the room. Emily was finishing up a report when she heard footsteps approach. She looked up, expecting it to be one of the other employees still finishing their work, but to her surprise, it was Nathan. He was standing at the door of her office, his usual composed expression replaced with something more uncertain. Emily, he said, his voice low. Can we talk? Her heart skipped a beat. She nodded quickly, standing up from her desk. Of course. Nathan walked into the office, and for a moment, they just stood there, facing each other. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Emily could feel her pulse quicken as she waited for him to speak. Finally, Nathan broke the silence. I know we've said, we're taking things slow, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. But I can't help but feel like I'm holding back. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She had prepared herself to take things one step at a time, to let things unfold at their own pace. But Nathan was pushing them forward now, and she couldn't deny that part of her was relieved. Nathan, she said softly, we've been doing okay. We're both trying. He nodded, but there was a flicker of frustration in his eyes. "I know," he said, taking a step closer. "But I can't ignore how I feel about you. I think about you all the time, and I don't want to keep pretending that it's just nothing." Emily's heart raced, her mind spinning with the weight of his words. This was the moment she had been dreading and yearning for all at once. She had wanted him to be honest, to confront the feelings that had been building between them, but now that it was happening, she wasn't sure how to respond. "Nathan, she paused, taking a deep breath. "I care about you too. I think you know that." Nathan's eyes softened as he stepped even closer, his gaze intense but filled with vulnerability. "I've been waiting for you to say that," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "I've been waiting for us to both admit that there's something real here." Emily felt a surge of emotion that caught her off guard. She had wanted this, wanted to take the next step with him, but now that it was happening, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. "But what does this mean for us?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What does this mean for work?" Nathan took another step closer, closing the space between them. "I don't have all the answers, Emily. But I don't want to keep pretending that this doesn't matter. I want to be with you, and I want to see where this goes. I'm not asking you to drop everything and make this the center of our lives, but I want to explore this. I want us to figure it out together." Emily's breath caught in her throat as she looked up at him. The sincerity in his eyes was overwhelming, and she could see the same mixture of excitement and uncertainty reflected back at her. This wasn't just about their professional relationship anymore. It was about something deeper, something they couldn't ignore. "Okay," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "Let's figure it out. Together." Nathan smiled, and in that moment, everything felt right. They were no longer just colleagues, no longer just two people trying to navigate their feelings from a distance. They were taking the next step together, whatever that meant. As Nathan leaned in, closing the distance between them, Emily's heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. This was the beginning of something new, something that had been building for weeks, and now they were ready to face it head-on. Nathan's lips brushed against hers, soft and tentative at first, but as their kiss deepened, everything else faded away. In that moment, Emily knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like they could handle it. Together. "I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 9, continuing from part 8, written according to your required format." In the weeks following their kiss, things between Emily and Nathan changed, but not in the way either of them expected. They had decided to take things slow, to let the connection between them evolve naturally, without rushing into anything. But it was impossible to ignore the chemistry that crackled whenever they were near each other. The air between them was electric, charged with a tension that neither could quite define but both could feel. At work, things remained professional, at least on the surface. They worked side by side, discussing reports and making decisions. But Emily couldn't help but notice how Nathan's eyes would linger on her just a moment too long. The small gestures continued, the way he opened the door for her, the little smiles they exchanged when no one else was looking. But nothing changed beyond that. Emily found herself caught between what she wanted and what she thought was possible. Nathan was still her boss, and no matter how much she felt for him, there were still lines they couldn't cross. She had her own career to think about, and a part of her worried that if they gave in to their feelings, it might complicate everything. But every time she saw him, heard his voice, or felt his presence in the room, all those doubts seemed to fade away. One Tuesday afternoon, as Emily sat at her desk, working through a particularly complicated project, she heard a knock at her office door. She looked up to see Nathan standing there, his usual composed self, but with a glimmer of something unspoken in his eyes. "Emily," he said, his voice calm, but with a certain edge to it. "Can we talk?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. They hadn't had a conversation like this since that night. She could feel the weight of what was coming, the anticipation building between them. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions she felt. Nathan stepped inside and closed the door behind him, his usual air of authority softened by something more personal. He walked over to her desk, standing in front of her, his posture relaxed but his eyes focused on hers. "I've been thinking a lot," Nathan began, his tone lower than usual. "About us, and about what comes next." Emily felt a flicker of unease in her chest. She had been expecting this conversation, but it didn't make it any easier. I know we agreed to take things slow, he continued, his voice calm. But I can't keep pretending like I don't feel the way I do. And I don't want you to think I'm rushing you into anything. But I think it's time we figure out where we stand. Emily swallowed hard. Her heart was racing as she tried to find the right words. She had been afraid of this moment, afraid that it might come too soon. But at the same time, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, the desire to explore what they had. I feel the same way, she said quietly, meeting his gaze. But I don't want us to make a decision we're not ready for. I think we need to be careful. Nathan nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. I agree, he said. But I don't want to keep pretending that this doesn't matter. You matter to me, Emily, more than I've allowed myself to admit. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and it stirred something deep inside her. Emily had always known that Nathan was an intelligent, driven man, but hearing him speak so openly about his feelings made her realize just how much he was risking. For them. I don't want to lose you, Nathan continued, his voice softer now. Not just as a colleague, but as something more. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had been afraid that their relationship, whatever it was, would be complicated by their professional roles, but Nathan's words made it clear that he was willing to take that risk. I don't want to lose you either, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions flooding her. But we have to be careful. We don't know how this will affect our work, and I don't want that to get in the way of what we're building. Nathan stepped closer, his gaze soft but determined. We'll figure it out together, he said, his hand gently reaching for hers. We don't have to have all the answers right now, but I want you to know that I'm in this. I want to explore what we have, whatever that means. Emily's heart fluttered at his words. This was everything she had hoped for, but at the same time, it felt like a huge leap into the unknown. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't facing it alone. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision ahead of them. Okay, she said, her voice firm but filled with a sense of calm. We'll take it one step at a time. Together. Nathan smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. One step at a time, he echoed. In that moment, Emily knew that this was just the beginning of something new for them. There would be challenges ahead, of course, but for the first time, she felt like they could face them as a team. Whatever happened, they would navigate it together, without rushing, without pushing, but with a quiet understanding that they were both ready for what came next. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 10, continuing from part 9, written according to your required format. As Emily and Nathan continued to navigate their relationship, the days seemed to pass by in a blur of unspoken moments and quiet understandings. They had both agreed to take things slow, but the connection between them was undeniable. Each passing day brought them closer, but also raised new questions about where this was going, about how it would affect their careers, and about whether they were truly ready for what they were feeling. At work, things were still professional, but there was an undeniable shift. Emily noticed how Nathan's eyes would linger on her when he thought no one was watching, the small touches of warmth in his gestures, like when he'd offer her a coffee in the morning or send a brief text to check in during busy days. She found herself looking forward to those small moments, cherishing the quiet exchanges that spoke volumes without needing words. But there were moments of uncertainty too. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were living in a delicate bubble, one that could burst at any time. Nathan had always been the CEO, the one with power and authority, and she was still his assistant, a role that often felt too far removed from the world he inhabited. Their relationship, however genuine, still existed within a complex web of office dynamics and professional expectations. It was difficult not to wonder if they could ever fully escape those boundaries. The first major test of their relationship came one Friday afternoon when Emily found herself in a meeting with Nathan, discussing an important project. They had worked together on various tasks before, but this time felt different. As Nathan spoke, outlining the strategy for their next big move, Emily noticed a shift in the way he interacted with her. His usual confidence seemed laced with something else, something more personal. It was subtle, but it was there. As the meeting concluded and the others left the room, Emily and Nathan were left alone. The air between them was thick, filled with unsaid words. Nathan stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. Emily, he said after a moment, his voice low, I think it's time we talk about what comes next. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had known this conversation was coming, but the reality of it still made her stomach churn. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Nathan turned to face her, his expression serious. "We can't keep pretending like nothing is happening between us. I care about you, Emily, and I don't want to keep holding back, not when we've already crossed this line." Emily felt a wave of nervousness wash over her. This was the moment. She had thought they had time, that they could continue to figure things out on their own terms, but now Nathan was pushing them forward. "Nathan, she began, but he cut her off gently. "I know this isn't easy," he said, stepping closer to her, "but I don't want to be afraid anymore. I don't want us to keep pretending that what we have is just a professional connection. It's more than that, and I need to know if you feel the same way." Emily took a deep breath. She had been trying to keep her emotions in check, trying to navigate this with caution, but Nathan's words stirred something inside her. She looked into his eyes, searching for the truth in them. "I do," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I care about you too, but I'm scared. Scared of what this means, scared of how it could change everything." Nathan reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch soft but firm. "I'm scared too," he admitted, his voice low. "But I don't want fear to keep us apart. I want us to explore this, Emily. I want to see where this could go." Emily's heart was racing as she stood there, in the quiet of the office, with Nathan's hands holding her face gently. Everything she had been holding back, all the doubts, all the fears, seemed to fade in that moment. "But what about work?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What about everything we've built here?" Nathan smiled softly, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. "We'll handle it, together. We don't have to rush, but we also don't have to hide from what's real." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, taking in his words. She had always believed in taking things slow, in making sure that everything was in place before moving forward. But now, she wasn't sure she could hold back any longer. She had spent so long trying to convince herself that this wasn't possible, that they were too different, that it would ruin everything. But now, standing there with Nathan, she realized that she didn't want to hold back anymore. Slowly, she reached up and placed her hand on his, the warmth of his skin sending a shiver through her. "Okay," she said, her voice steady now. "Let's see where this goes." Nathan's eyes softened, and he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was soft at first, hesitant, but full of promise. It wasn't a kiss of finality or certainty, but of a new beginning. When they pulled away, Emily found herself smiling, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Nathan smiled back, his hand still gently resting on hers. "One step at a time," he said, his voice low but filled with warmth. Emily nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle in her chest. They were no longer just two colleagues navigating the complexities of their professional lives. They were something more, something real. And whatever came next, they would face it together. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 12, continuing from part 11, written according to your required format. It had been weeks since Emily and Nathan had shared their first real conversation about their feelings. Things between them had only deepened, and yet, they still found themselves at a crossroads. They had agreed to take things slow, but each passing day seemed to bring new challenges that tested their patience and their bond. Their professional lives remained intertwined, but in the moments when it was just the two of them, there was an undeniable pull. The connection between them was magnetic, something they both tried to navigate without letting it overshadow their work. Emily found herself stealing glances at Nathan, her heart beating a little faster every time he looked in her direction. It wasn't just the chemistry they shared, it was the way they had grown to understand each other, to communicate without words. But as much as they both cared for each other, there was still the ever-present question hanging over their heads. Where would this lead? Could they continue to keep their personal feelings from affecting their careers? Nathan, for his part, was more than aware of the risks. He knew that as the CEO, any romantic involvement could cause rumors, divide opinions, and potentially cause a conflict of interest. He didn't want to jeopardize everything he had worked for, but he couldn't deny how much Emily meant to him. It wasn't just her intelligence, her work ethic, or her unwavering loyalty to the company that drew him to her. It was the way she made him feel, The way she had a way of making even the most difficult situations seem manageable. Still, despite their connection, there were moments when Nathan pulled back, unsure of whether he was doing the right thing. He knew he was in uncharted territory. One evening, after another long day at the office, Emily was sitting in the lounge area of their building, going through some emails when Nathan walked in. It had been a quieter day at work, and most of the staff had already left. He paused when he saw her, his eyes softening when he caught sight of her at her desk. He walked over, leaning against the table. "Hey," he said gently, his voice breaking the silence of the room. Emily looked up, startled, but she smiled when she saw him. "Hey you," she said, her voice warmer than she intended. Nathan sat down beside her, his eyes scanning the papers in front of her before meeting her gaze. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said, his voice serious but calm. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had known this conversation was coming. She had felt it hanging in the air for days now. "What about us?" she asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I think about you all the time, Emily, and I can't keep pretending that I'm not falling for you." His words hit her like a wave, crashing into her chest. She wasn't sure what to say at first. She had felt the same, but hearing him say it out loud made everything feel so real. "I don't want to complicate things, but I can't keep denying how I feel," he continued, his voice more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. Emily looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of the papers on the desk as she thought carefully about her response. The truth was, she felt the same way. But the question remained, could they make this work? Could they navigate their personal relationship while keeping their professional lives intact? "Nathan, I care about you, more than I ever expected. But this is complicated," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're already walking a fine line, and I'm scared. What if this ends up affecting everything we've worked for?" Nathan nodded, his expression somber. "I know. I've been thinking the same thing. But I don't want to live in fear anymore. I don't want to regret not taking the chance on something that could be real." Emily's heart swelled at his words, but her mind raced with all the possible consequences. "I don't want to regret it either," she admitted. "But we have to be smart. We can't let this get in the way of everything we've worked so hard for. We can't be reckless." Nathan reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I'm not asking you to be reckless," he said softly. "I'm asking for us to be honest with each other. To take it one step at a time and see where it leads." Emily met his gaze, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. Maybe it wouldn't be easy. Maybe it would come with its own set of challenges. But one thing was certain. They couldn't deny what they had between them. "One step at a time," she echoed, squeezing his hand in return. Nathan smiled, a faint but genuine smile. "We'll figure this out. Together." The weight of their decision hung in the air between them. But there was something comforting about the certainty of knowing that they were in this together. There would be obstacles, yes, but Emily finally felt that they could face them as a team. And with that simple understanding, the tension that had been building between them for so long seemed to ease, if only for a moment. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future with Nathan, one that was uncertain, but filled with hope. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and for now, that was enough. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 13, continuing from part 12, written according to your required format. The days after their conversation were filled with a new sense of understanding between Emily and Nathan. They had agreed to take things slow, to let their relationship evolve naturally. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. Emily found herself going through the motions at work with a new sense of purpose, but there was always that quiet anticipation in the back of her mind. Every time she saw Nathan, her heart would flutter, but she also knew that they couldn't rush into anything. The complications were still there, lingering just below the surface. Nathan, for his part, seemed to have found a delicate balance. He remained the focused, professional CEO that everyone looked up to, but there were moments when Emily caught him looking at her with something softer in his eyes. It was almost as if he was still processing everything, just as she was. One Thursday afternoon, as the workday wound down, Emily found herself sitting at her desk, organizing a few reports. It had been a busy week, and the tension that had been building between them was palpable. They hadn't spoken about their relationship since their conversation, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were both avoiding the inevitable. The world around her seemed to fade as her thoughts consumed her. She glanced at the clock, noting that it was almost time for her to leave. Just as she gathered her things, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up, and to her surprise, Nathan was standing in her doorway. He had a faint smile on his face, but there was something different about the way he looked at her this time. "Emily," he said, his voice soft but filled with purpose. "I need to talk to you." Emily's heart skipped a beat. It had been a few days since they had really spoken, and she had the sense that he wanted to address something important. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. Nathan stepped into the room and gently closed the door behind him. The moment felt surreal, like they were stepping into uncharted territory once again. "We've been trying to figure this out, and I think it's time we talk about where we go from here," Nathan began, his tone serious but kind. Emily's stomach flipped. She had known this was coming. They could only dance around their feelings for so long. "I know we agreed to take things slow," Nathan continued, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "But I think we're both ready for more, aren't we?" Emily hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. She had always been careful, cautious, unsure of what this relationship would mean for her and Nathan. But now, standing there with him, it felt like the right time. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady. "I think we are." Nathan let out a breath, almost as if he had been holding it in for a long time. "I've been thinking about this a lot, and I don't want to hold back anymore. I don't want us to keep pretending that what's between us is just something we can ignore." Emily's heart pounded as she listened to him. This was everything she had been waiting for, but also everything that scared her. "What are you saying, Nathan?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nathan took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "I'm saying that I care about you, Emily," he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "I want us to be together. I'm willing to take the risk, no matter what it means for our work or anything else. I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is just a passing thing." Emily felt a surge of emotions flood through her. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he said them, like he was finally being honest with himself, with her. She had spent so long holding back, unsure of what was right, and now she knew what she had to do. "I care about you too," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been scared, Nathan. Scared of what this could mean for us, scared of how it could affect everything. But I don't want to be scared anymore." Nathan smiled, a soft, relieved smile, and gently reached for her hand. "We'll figure it out, together," he said, his voice filled with certainty. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she looked into his eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt like everything was falling into place. They didn't have all the answers, and there were still obstacles ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. She didn't want to do this without him. As Nathan leaned in, his lips brushing softly against hers, Emily felt a warmth spread through her. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise, a commitment to face whatever came next together. When they pulled away, Nathan rested his forehead against hers, and they stood there in the quiet of the office, the weight of the world outside forgotten for just a moment. "One step at a time, right?" Emily whispered, a small smile tugging at her lips. Nathan nodded, his hand still holding hers. "One step at a time," he echoed, his voice steady. They both knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, there would be moments of doubt, and there would be times when they would have to make difficult choices. But for now, they were ready to face it all together. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt a sense of peace. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Nathan was by her side, and together, they would take that first step into the unknown. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 14, continuing from part 13, written according to your required format. The days following their decision to move forward together were both exhilarating and challenging. Emily and Nathan had finally acknowledged the undeniable connection between them, but with that came a new set of complexities. It was not just the feelings they had for each other that weighed heavily on their minds, but the reality of their situation. Nathan was the CEO, and Emily was his assistant. They were still in a workplace environment, and they both understood the consequences of blurring those professional lines. At the same time, there was an undeniable pull between them, a magnetic force that made it hard to ignore what was developing. As much as they tried to maintain a sense of normalcy at work, There were moments when their shared glances, quiet smiles, and lingering touches spoke volumes. In private, things were easier, their connection deepening with every passing day. But the more they spent time together, the more they realized how fragile their situation truly was. Both of them were aware that they couldn't continue this way forever. The risks were becoming harder to ignore, and the fear of what would happen if anyone found out loomed over them. Still, in those quiet moments, when it was just the two of them, Emily couldn't help but feel like they were doing the right thing. But as time passed, the question of how to navigate their growing feelings for each other in a professional setting became more pressing. They had agreed to take things slow, but how long could they keep their emotions in check? One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting with the board, Nathan found Emily in her office, going over some documents. He knocked gently on the door before entering, his expression more serious than usual. Emily looked up from her desk, feeling a twinge of unease. She had been expecting a conversation, though she wasn't sure what it would be about. "Emily," Nathan began, his voice steady, but there was an edge of tension in it. "We need to talk." She stood up immediately, her heart skipping a beat. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Nathan stepped further into the room and closed the door behind him, his eyes focused on hers. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said quietly. "About what we're doing. About where we go from here." Emily's stomach churned. She had a feeling she knew what this conversation was going to be about. "I know we agreed to take it slow," Nathan continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I don't want to keep hiding this. I don't want us to keep pretending that nothing is going on between us." Emily felt a pang of anxiety, but she nodded, keeping her voice calm. "I understand, Nathan, but we can't ignore the consequences. We've talked about this before." Nathan walked over to the window, running a hand through his hair as he stared out at the city. "I know," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But I can't keep pretending like this isn't real. I care about you, Emily, and I don't want to keep fighting what's between us. It's not fair to either of us." Emily sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the decision they were facing. She knew this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everything they had worked for, everything they had built. "I care about you too," she admitted, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "But we both know how risky this is. What if things don't work out? What if it ruins everything we've worked for?" Nathan turned to face her, his expression serious but calm. "I can't live in fear, Emily. I can't keep wondering what might happen if we don't take a chance. I want to be with you, and I'm willing to figure this out, no matter the obstacles." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She had spent so much time wondering whether they could make this work, and now Nathan was asking her to take that step with him. "But Nathan," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "we're still in the same situation. You're my boss, and I'm your assistant. This could ruin both of us." Nathan stepped closer to her, his voice low and steady. "I understand the risks," he said, his eyes searching hers. "But I don't want to let this go. I want us to take the next step, no matter what. We don't have to have all the answers right now, but we can't keep pretending that we don't feel this way." Emily felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had never imagined that things would get to this point, but now, standing here with Nathan, she couldn't deny what she was feeling. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice steady now. "Let's take that step. Together." Nathan smiled, his eyes lighting up with relief and joy. "Together," he repeated softly, as if savoring the words. He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. In that moment, Emily felt a sense of calm settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever risks they had to face, they would face them together. They weren't just navigating their professional lives anymore. They were taking a leap into something more personal, more real. And for the first time, Emily felt confident in that decision. The road ahead would not be easy, but with Nathan by her side, she knew they could handle it. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like they were ready for whatever it brought. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 15, continuing from part 14, written according to your required format. The days following their decision to move forward together felt both exhilarating and daunting. Emily and Nathan had taken a leap, acknowledging the undeniable connection they shared, but they both knew that this new chapter in their lives came with its own set of challenges. Their decision to be open about their feelings had created a new dynamic, not just in their personal relationship, but in the way they interacted with the rest of the world. The office had always been a professional environment, and now, as they navigated this delicate balance, the stakes felt higher than ever. They continued to work side by side, but the space between them had grown smaller, the air charged with unspoken words. Nathan had been cautious, always careful to maintain a professional demeanor in front of others. He was still the CEO, and his position came with responsibilities that could not be overlooked. But when they were alone, there was an ease between them, a comfort that neither of them had expected. They would steal moments together, sharing quiet conversations during lunch breaks or exchanging knowing glances across the room, and each of these small gestures brought them closer. Still, the reality of their situation loomed over them. There was always the lingering question: how long could they keep their relationship a secret? How long before their connection became too obvious for anyone to ignore? Emily found herself consumed by the fear of being discovered. She didn't want to be the subject of office gossip, and she certainly didn't want to jeopardize Nathan's position. She had always respected him as her boss, and now, in this new, more intimate dynamic, she was torn between her feelings for him and her sense of professionalism. One day, during a quiet afternoon, Emily was deep in thought, staring at a report that needed to be finalized. She was aware of the sounds around her, the soft hum of the office, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Nathan hadn't spoken to her as much that morning, and she couldn't help but wonder if the weight of their situation was finally starting to take its toll on him. As she looked up from her desk, she saw Nathan walking toward her. There was something different about the way he approached her, something that made her heart skip a beat. He stopped in front of her desk and placed a folder on the table. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a hint of concern. Emily's stomach twisted in knots. She had felt this conversation coming, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. "Of course," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. Nathan took a seat across from her, his posture relaxed but his expression serious. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice soft, as if he was choosing his words carefully. "About us. About how things are going." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to respond. "I know we said we'd take things slow," Nathan continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "But the longer we keep this to ourselves, the harder it gets. I don't want us to feel like we're hiding. I don't want you to feel like you have to keep our relationship a secret." Emily's heart raced. She had feared this very moment, the point where they would have to confront the reality of their situation. "Nathan," she said softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty, "what are we going to do about this? How can we keep this professional, when it's becoming so much more than that?" Nathan leaned back in his chair, his hand resting on the table, his thumb lightly tapping against the surface. "I don't have all the answers, Emily," he admitted, his tone thoughtful. "But I do know that I don't want to let fear dictate what we can have. I don't want us to keep second-guessing ourselves, wondering if we're doing the right thing. We have to trust that we're making the right decision together." Emily looked down, her fingers playing with the edge of the report she had been reading. The weight of the situation felt heavier than ever, and yet, hearing Nathan speak so openly about his feelings made her feel like they weren't so alone in this after all. "I want to trust you," she said quietly, "but I'm scared. I'm scared of what happens if someone finds out. What happens if this affects everything we've worked for?" Nathan's expression softened, and he reached out, his hand gently covering hers. "I understand," he said, his voice filled with empathy. "But we can't live in fear of what might happen. We can only control how we move forward. I'm not asking you to take a leap of faith without knowing the risks, but I am asking you to trust me, to trust that whatever happens, we'll face it together." Emily's heart fluttered at his words. She had always known that Nathan was a man of integrity, someone who stood by his decisions. And now, as she looked at him, she realized that she felt the same way. They were in this together, no matter the outcome. She took a deep breath, the weight of the decision still heavy in her chest. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "Let's move forward, together. But we need to be careful. We need to make sure we don't let this affect our work, or the way we're seen by others." Nathan smiled, his eyes lighting up with relief. "I agree. We'll take it one step at a time, and we'll figure it out as we go." Emily squeezed his hand, feeling a sense of peace settle in her chest. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be hurdles ahead. But in that moment, She felt more certain than ever that they were ready to face whatever came next. Together, I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 16, continuing from part 15, written according to your required format. The decision to move forward together was both a relief and a new burden. Emily and Nathan had taken their first big step, but the world around them seemed to be pressing down harder than ever. The risk of their relationship becoming public was always in the back of their minds. The office was still a place of professional expectations, and their growing closeness began to feel more like a secret than a bond they could fully embrace. As days passed, they tried to maintain their normal routine. Nathan was still the CEO, and Emily was still his assistant, but their personal connection made everything more complicated. They were constantly walking a tightrope, trying to balance their work with their feelings for each other. Despite the stress of keeping their relationship under wraps, the time they spent together, in private or in stolen moments, was filled with warmth. When they shared lunch breaks or exchanged quick glances in meetings, it felt like they were finally allowing themselves to live in the moment, something they hadn't done before. Yet, as much as they enjoyed these private moments, there were always the looming consequences of their situation. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that their secret was becoming harder to keep. She was aware of the way the others in the office looked at them now. People had started to notice the subtle shifts. The way Nathan's gaze lingered on her a little longer than it should, the way their conversations seemed to carry a weight that was impossible to ignore. Though they never openly acknowledged it, Emily knew that the whispers were starting. Rumors had a way of spreading quickly in an office environment, especially one as high pressure as theirs. Nathan had always been a private person, a man who kept his personal life separate from his professional one. Yet, now that he and Emily had taken this step, it was difficult for him to keep the two worlds apart. The weight of the situation was beginning to take a toll on him. One afternoon, as Emily sat in her office, finishing up a report, she saw Nathan standing in the doorway, his posture rigid and his eyes distant. He had a look on his face that she recognized, a look of someone carrying an invisible burden. "We need to talk," Nathan said, his voice carrying a level of seriousness she hadn't heard before. Emily's heart sank. She had a feeling she knew what this was about. "Okay," she replied, standing up and walking toward him. Nathan stepped into her office, closing the door behind him. The air between them felt heavier than ever. "What's going on?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Nathan walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. "I'm worried, Emily," he admitted after a long pause. "We've been so careful, but I feel like it's getting harder to keep this secret. People are starting to notice. I'm not sure how long we can keep this under wraps." Emily's stomach twisted. She had known that this moment would come, but hearing Nathan express his concerns made it feel all too real. "I know," she said softly. "I've been worried about it too. I can feel the eyes on us when we're in meetings. I don't want anyone to think that we're compromising our work because of this." Nathan nodded, turning back to face her. "It's not just about us anymore," he said quietly. "It's about the whole company. I don't want to put either of us in a position where our relationship could affect our work or the trust we've built with the team." Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She understood what he was saying. They had both worked hard to get to where they were, and they couldn't afford to let anything jeopardize their success. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. Nathan walked closer to her, his hand gently touching her arm. "I think we need to make a decision," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "We either keep this going in secret and risk it all, or we decide that our relationship is something worth fighting for, something we don't have to hide anymore." Emily's heart raced as she processed his words. She had always known this day would come, the day when they would have to choose between what they wanted and the consequences of pursuing it. "I don't want to hide," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't want to be ashamed of what we have." Nathan's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Then we'll have to make sure that we're ready for whatever comes next," he said softly. "We'll have to be strong, and we'll have to face the challenges together." Emily looked up at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and hope. She knew that nothing was simple about this situation. There were risks, and there would be sacrifices. But she also knew that she didn't want to live a life of hiding, of pretending. She wanted to take this step with Nathan, to face the future with him by her side. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do it." Together. Nathan smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. Together, he echoed, his voice filled with certainty. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, and that there would be obstacles to overcome. But in that moment, as they stood together in the quiet of her office, they both knew that whatever came next, they would face it as a team. No longer would they hide what they felt for each other. It was time to stop living in the shadows and start embracing the future, no matter how uncertain it might be. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 17, continuing from part 16, written according to your required format. The days that followed their decision to go public with their relationship were a whirlwind of emotions. Emily and Nathan had chosen to face the future together, and with that choice came a certain level of uncertainty. They had both known that the risks were high, but the desire to stop hiding their feelings for each other outweighed the fear of potential consequences. At work, things began to shift. They could no longer pretend that their relationship was just another professional connection. The subtle glances and quiet moments they had shared in private now carried a weight in the office. The air seemed thicker, charged with a new energy. Despite their best efforts to maintain professionalism, it was becoming clear that everyone was noticing the change. Some colleagues had started to talk. The rumor mill had begun its inevitable churn. Emily had known that would happen, but it didn't make the reality any easier to bear. The whispers, the raised eyebrows, the pointed glances, all of it felt like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. She had always prided herself on her ability to keep her personal life separate from her work, but now, with Nathan by her side, she was no longer invisible. She had been aware of her place in the office, of how she had always remained in the background, but now that was changing, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. Nathan, too, felt the pressure. As CEO, his every move was scrutinized, and now his relationship with Emily was part of the equation. He knew it would be impossible to keep this private for long, but he was committed to standing by her, to proving that their relationship didn't change their dedication to the company. Still, the tension between them, even if unspoken, was palpable. They found themselves navigating not just the professional challenges of their roles, but also the personal complexities that came with being in a relationship where the stakes were so high. Emily could feel the change in Nathan, the way he carried the weight of their decisions on his shoulders. He was constantly thinking, constantly weighing the implications of their actions, and she knew that the burden of it all was starting to take a toll on him. It was one Friday evening when they both found themselves alone in the office again, the building quiet except for the hum of computers and the occasional shuffle of papers. Emily had stayed late to finish a project, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The tension was building again, and she wasn't sure how much longer they could keep up the pretense of everything being normal. She was lost in thought when Nathan knocked on her office door. He stepped inside, his face etched with concern. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice firm but softer than usual. Emily looked up from her desk, feeling the weight of his words immediately. She had known this conversation was coming. They couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice steady, even though her heart was racing. Nathan closed the door behind him, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've been thinking about how everything is changing," he began, his tone serious. "About what's going on with us, and about what's happening in the office. I can feel the pressure building, and I don't want it to start affecting our work." Emily's heart sank. She had known that the situation couldn't stay the same forever, but hearing him voice his concerns out loud made everything feel more real, more urgent. "I know," she said quietly. "I've been feeling it too. The whispers, the looks, it's starting to get to me." Nathan walked over to her desk, sitting down across from her. He took a deep breath before speaking again. "Emily, I care about you, more than anything, but I'm starting to wonder if we're ready for everything that's coming. I'm not just talking about our relationship, but the way the office is reacting. People are noticing, and I don't want it to affect you." Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. She had always known that their relationship would come with challenges, but hearing Nathan speak so honestly about the pressure he was feeling made her realize just how complicated this had become. "I don't want to let this ruin what we have," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm scared of what might happen if things go too far. If it starts to affect our work, or if people start judging us because of it." Nathan's gaze softened as he looked at her, his hand reaching across the table to gently touch hers. I'm scared too, he admitted. But I can't imagine my life without you in it. I don't want to let fear control our decisions. We have to be stronger than that. Emily's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at him. She had always admired Nathan's strength, his ability to make difficult decisions. But now, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, she realized that they were both in this together. I don't want to let fear control us either, she said, squeezing his hand. But we need to. Be careful. We can't let this become something that ruins everything we've worked for. Nathan nodded, his thumb gently rubbing her hand. We will be careful, he said, his voice steady. We'll figure this out together. And we won't let anything get in the way of what we have. Emily smiled, a wave of relief washing over her. The path ahead was still uncertain, but she felt a sense of peace knowing that they were in this together, that they would face whatever came next as a team. No matter the challenges, they were ready to face them side by side. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 18, continuing from part 17, written according to your required format. As time passed, Emily and Nathan found themselves slipping deeper into the complexity of their relationship. They had made the decision to stop hiding, to face the reality of their feelings for each other, but every day brought new challenges. The office environment was no longer just a place of work. It had become a battleground of unspoken tension, whispers, and sideways glances. They were walking a fine line, constantly aware that their actions were being observed. Nathan had always been a man of control, of strategy, but now even he was starting to feel the pressure of the situation. He had built this company from the ground up, and he knew how delicate everything could be. His focus, his reputation, had always been everything to him. But now, it was tied to something far more personal. The realization that Emily had become such an integral part of his life was both a blessing and a curse. Every time they shared a quiet moment together, every time their hands brushed by accident or their gazes locked in the midst of a conversation, it reminded them of the stakes. Their connection was undeniable, but so were the risks. One morning, as Emily sat at her desk, reviewing a report, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The energy in the office felt different. The usual hum of activity was punctuated by hushed voices, and she could sense eyes lingering on her more than usual. Her pulse quickened as she glanced across the room, and there, standing near the conference room, was Nathan, engaged in a conversation with one of the senior managers. She couldn't hear their words, but she saw the tense expressions on their faces. Something was happening, and she knew it had something to do with them. After the meeting ended, Nathan approached her office. He seemed distant, his usual composure replaced by an air of frustration. Emily stood as he entered, immediately sensing the shift. Nathan? She asked, her voice filled with concern. He didn't meet her eyes at first, but instead, he walked over to her desk and set down a file. We need to talk, he said, his tone quieter than usual. Emily's heart dropped. She had been expecting this. What's going on? She asked, bracing herself. Nathan let out a deep sigh. There are rumors, Emily. People are starting to talk. I can feel it in the air. Emily's stomach twisted. She had known that this was coming, but hearing Nathan acknowledge it out loud made everything seem real. What kind of rumors? She asked, though she had a sinking feeling she knew the answer. Nathan looked at her, his face a mix of frustration and concern. The kind that threatened everything we've worked for, he said, his voice tense. People are starting to speculate about us, about what's really going on between us. I've heard whispers in the halls, and I'm sure you have too. Emily nodded slowly, her mind racing. We knew this was a possibility, she said, trying to steady herself. But we can't let it get in the way of what we're trying to build. Nathan's eyes softened as he looked at her. I know, but it's not just about us anymore. The company, the people we work with, they're starting to notice, and it's only a matter of time before it gets out of control. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had always been able to compartmentalize, to keep her professional life separate from her personal one. But now, the two were so intertwined that it felt impossible to keep them apart. What do we do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan's gaze flickered with uncertainty, but there was a determination in his eyes as he spoke. We need to decide what matters more, our relationship or the reputation of this company. I can't make that decision alone. Emily felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. This was the moment they had feared, the moment when they had to choose between what they wanted and what was safe. But as she looked at Nathan, she realized that she didn't want to live in fear anymore. She didn't want to hide their connection. She wanted to face whatever came next with him, even if it meant making difficult choices. "We'll face it together," Emily said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. "We've already made the decision to be honest with each other. We can't go back now." Nathan gave her a small, appreciative smile, though the worry lines around his eyes hadn't faded. "I know," he said quietly, "but we need to be prepared for what comes next. If we decide to stand by us, it's going to shake things up. People are going to have opinions." Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in her mind. "We'll handle it," she said, her voice more certain now. "We'll face it, no matter what." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of doubt. When he found none, he nodded, the weight of the situation hanging in the air between them. "One step at a time," he said. "We'll move forward, and we'll do it together." Emily smiled, though she knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. There were too many variables, too many risks involved. But in that moment, she realized that the most important thing was that they were on the same side. Whatever challenges came next, they would face them together, as partners, both in business and in life. They were no longer hiding, no longer living in the shadows. They were ready to embrace whatever came next, no matter how uncertain it seemed. "I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 19, continuing from part 18, written according to your required format." As the days passed, the weight of the decision Emily and Nathan had made began to sink in. They had chosen to be honest with each other, to stop hiding, but the consequences of their choice were now more apparent than ever. The tension in the office had escalated. Whispers, stares, and hushed conversations were becoming more frequent, and Emily could feel the eyes of their colleagues on her, especially when she shared a private moment with Nathan. It was impossible to ignore the changes in the office dynamic. Even as they continued to work side by side, their connection was undeniable, and now it was evident to everyone around them. Emily had always been the quiet, focused assistant, but now she felt more like the subject of discussion, an uncomfortable spotlight that she couldn't escape. She had never been one to crave attention, and the new scrutiny weighed heavily on her. Still, despite the discomfort, there was a part of her that was relieved. She no longer had to hide the relationship with Nathan, no longer had to pretend that their connection wasn't real. But with that relief came a new set of challenges. They had chosen to be transparent, but the world around them wasn't as ready to accept their choice as they were. Nathan, too, was feeling the strain. He was used to being in control, used to making decisions that shaped the future of the company. But now, he was in uncharted territory. Being the CEO meant that everything he did was under scrutiny, and his relationship with Emily was no exception. He could see how the whispers were starting to spread, how the employees were beginning to take sides. Some were supportive, but others were clearly uncomfortable with the idea of their relationship. The pressure was starting to mount, and Nathan could feel the weight of it. He had never imagined that something so personal would affect the company he had worked so hard to build. One afternoon, as the workday came to a close, Nathan found Emily in her office, sitting behind her desk, lost in thought. She hadn't noticed him enter, and he stood there for a moment, watching her. She looked up at him, and he saw the tiredness in her eyes, the same exhaustion that had been building for days. "Hey," he said softly, walking over to her desk. "We need to talk." Emily nodded, already sensing the seriousness in his voice. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with worry. Nathan took a seat across from her, his expression more solemn than usual. "I've been thinking about everything," he began, his voice low. "About us. About the company. I don't want this to affect the way we do business, Emily. But I can feel the pressure building, and it's starting to get to me." Emily's heart ached as she listened to him. She could see the burden in his eyes, the internal struggle he was facing. "I know," she said quietly. "I've been feeling it too. It's like we can't escape the tension. Every time we're in a room together, I feel like everyone is watching us." Nathan sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "I hate that it's like this," he admitted. "I hate that something so simple, something so real between us, has to be complicated by everything else. But we both know this can't go on like this forever." Emily leaned forward, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of her desk as she considered his words. So what do we do? She asked softly. Nathan looked at her, his eyes searching hers for the answers they both knew were difficult to find. I don't want to lose what we have, he said quietly. But I also don't want it to tear us apart or affect our work. I don't want to let this destroy everything we've worked for. Emily felt a pang in her chest. She understood exactly what he was saying. She didn't want to lose him either, but they couldn't ignore the reality of their situation. I don't want to lose this either, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. But I don't know how we can keep doing this. We have to find a way to make it work. Nathan nodded slowly, his hand reaching across the desk to gently grasp hers. We will, he said, his voice filled with determination. We'll figure this out, but we need to do it together. We can't let the outside world dictate our relationship. We have to be strong, even when it feels like everything around us is crumbling. Emily looked down at their hands, the warmth of his touch grounding her. I know, she said quietly. We'll take it one step at a time, right? Nathan smiled faintly, a soft but genuine expression that warmed her heart. One step at a time, he agreed. As they sat there, hand in hand, they both knew that the road ahead would be difficult. The pressure of their situation was only going to increase as time went on, but they were no longer facing it alone. Together, they had the strength to face whatever came their way. They weren't just partners in business anymore. They were partners in life, and they would navigate the challenges together. The future was uncertain, but with Nathan by her side, Emily felt a sense of peace. They would face the world together, no matter what it had in store. I apologize for the previous misunderstanding. Here is part 20, continuing from part 19, written according to your required format. In the months that followed, Emily and Nathan learned to navigate the delicate balance between their personal and professional lives. The road wasn't always smooth, but each day they grew stronger as a couple, their bond solidifying in ways neither of them had expected. The pressures they faced at work, the whispers and the sideways glances, were still present, but they no longer had the same weight they once did. They had come to terms with the reality of their situation, accepting that their relationship wasn't going to fit neatly into the box they had originally envisioned. They were learning to build something new, something that was uniquely theirs, even if it was complicated by their roles within the company. Nathan had always been the CEO, the man in control, but being with Emily had softened him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He wasn't afraid to be vulnerable with her, to share his thoughts, fears, and dreams. And Emily, who had always kept a part of herself hidden behind the walls of professionalism, found herself opening up in ways she hadn't thought possible. They had built trust, and in doing so, they had created a foundation strong enough to withstand whatever challenges lay ahead. At work, things had started to settle. The rumors had subsided over time, though they never completely disappeared. Some people still raised eyebrows when they saw the two of them together, but for the most part, their colleagues had come to accept the reality of their relationship. The power dynamics were still there, but they no longer held the same weight. Emily was still Nathan's assistant, but their partnership felt more like a partnership than ever before. They had found ways to support each other, to communicate openly and honestly, and to make decisions that benefited both their personal lives and their professional endeavors. The company was thriving, and so was their relationship. They both continued to work hard, pushing themselves to succeed, but now there was a shared sense of purpose between them. They were no longer working in isolation, but as a team. Nathan was still the CEO, but Emily was no longer just an assistant. She was his confidant, his partner in more ways than one. And as they faced new challenges, they did so together. One afternoon, Nathan called Emily into his office. She walked in, wondering what he had in mind, but when she saw the smile on his face, her heart skipped a beat. Come sit with me, Nathan said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Emily took a seat, still curious about what was on his mind. I've been thinking a lot, Nathan began, his eyes meeting hers. About us. About everything we've been through. Emily listened intently, her heart racing slightly, unsure where this conversation was going. Nathan took a deep breath before continuing. I know it hasn't always been easy. I know we've had our share of challenges, but I'm proud of what we've built together, both in the office and in our personal lives. And I want you to know that no matter what comes next, I'm committed to you, to us. Emily felt a surge of emotion as she listened to him. The words he spoke felt like a confirmation of everything they had been working toward. I'm committed to us too, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. We've come so far, and I'm not going to let anything tear us apart. I want to keep building this, what we have, what we're building together. Nathan smiled, his eyes softening. I'm glad to hear that. And I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of peace. She had spent so many months wondering what the future held, unsure of what would come next. But now, with Nathan by her side, she realized that the future didn't have to be uncertain. Together, they could face anything. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Nathan continued to work side by side, their relationship continuing to evolve and strengthen. The challenges they had faced were not gone, but they no longer felt insurmountable. They had learned how to communicate, how to trust each other, and how to handle the pressures of their roles. It wasn't always perfect, but nothing in life ever was. What mattered was that they were in it together. As they looked toward the future, there were still unknowns. There would always be challenges to face, but Emily and Nathan knew that as long as they had each other, they could weather any storm. They had found something real, something worth fighting for, and they were determined to protect it. And so, with a new sense of clarity and purpose, they stepped into the future, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. In this captivating tale of romance, business, and power dynamics, follow the journey of Emily and Nathan as they navigate the complexities of their feelings for each other while trying to maintain their professional lives. As they confront the challenges of their relationship, they realize that their bond is more than just a fleeting attraction. Their story explores the balance between personal desires and professional ambitions, offering a gripping insight into the world of corporate relationships. With the backdrop of a high-powered workplace, their connection grows deeper, but so does the pressure. Will their love withstand the challenges of their millionaire lifestyle, or will it become another casualty of ambition? Dive into these millionaire stories to discover how love, loyalty, and sacrifice can play out when two people are determined to make it work against all odds. With each step they take, they face new obstacles, but together, they learn that their connection is worth fighting for. As the stakes grow higher and the eyes of the office scrutinize their every move, Emily and Nathan must decide whether their relationship can truly survive in the high-stakes world of millionaires. With rich emotional depth and undeniable chemistry, this millionaire story reveals the true meaning of partnership, love, and resilience. Can they keep their love a secret, or will the world soon know about their millionaire romance? Follow their journey and see how these millionaire stories unfold in unexpected ways, proving that sometimes, love is worth the risk.